Hey everyone, welcome to Adobe Live this week. My name's Liv and I'll be the host. Today we have James Tran with us. Welcome.
Hello.
If you're just joining us, feel free to jump in the chat. We've already got some people there who are eager to get in. Hey Rebecca, hey John. If you want to join the chat, you can just log in with your Adobe ID. If you haven't got one, it's super easy to make. You can do it I think it's in the top of the browser there. You can click on the red button. There should be one there. Cool. So today we are looking at working in After Effects, which is super exciting. And James is going to take us through some of his work, some of the stuff that he does. We're going to learn about his process, which I'm super excited about as well. So maybe if we just want to get started, do you want to maybe take us through a little bit about who you are, what your background is, how did you get here?
Yep. Hey, so my name is James. I'm a motion designer based in Sydney, but motion designer / graphics designer. I've been doing motion design since when I graduated university, so since 2012. And I've started in advertising. I went to broadcast, and now I'm just freelancing and just doing whatever.
Cool.
Mostly in television.
Yeah. Yep. Any shows that people would know, perhaps?
So it's mostly science and kids shows. So unless you've got kids, maybe you'll know it. There's this one called Wow, That's Amazing. So it's on the ABC right now.
And are you doing the titles or the bits in between through the show?
So a bit of everything. I touched a bit of the titles, a bit of the graphic segments.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
nice. Cool. And so you went to uni, and so you're doing that sort of stuff now.
Yeah.
What sort of equipment do you use day to day?
For animation or?
Animation. I know we're going to look a little bit about bringing photography into After Effects, so it'd be great to sort of hear about some of the tools that you're using for that side of things too.
Okay. So for animation, I mainly use After Effects and a bit of Cinema 4D, which does come, a light version does come with After Effects.
Yeah, cool.
And when it comes to cinemagraphs, I've always used a camera plus a tripod, again, like a computer. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And so what sort of camera do you have?
So I currently use an A7R3, but you can pretty much use any camera to make cinemagraphs.
Are you the type of person that has lots of lenses and you change a lot, or you have a kind of go-to one lens?
So I started with lots of lenses, but now I find that I try to minimize how much lenses I carry. So I usually just stick with a 35mm lens.
Yeah, versatile.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Maybe do you want to show us a little bit of your work that you've done just on Instagram? Because you kind of primarily use Instagram, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the time, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe do you want to jump on there and we can have a look at some of your just posts recently? People can then follow you as well.
Maybe it's best if you just, I don't know, what are you interested in? So, you want me just to click through
Yeah,
them?
let's just have a look. Let's take us through some of them, have a look at what they do.
Yeah.
So you kind of use this sort of cinematograph kind of technique in a lot of your work. Do you want to maybe break that down a little bit for people and talk about what that is?
So cinemagraphs is sort of it's sort of a photograph with a bit of a moving element. And that's what it basically is. But there's a few rules to cinemagraphs. So the frame should not move, so it should be set down and locked down. So it's you can see it forever and forever like a photograph, because you can view a photograph and it will never change. Same thing with a cinemagraph, because if it's a video and doesn't loop, then it sort of breaks the illusion of a cinemagraph.
Yeah. And so you've got this one here, which has got sort of fish going through the background.
So they're supposed to be rockets.
Oh, rockets, sorry. It's from a distance, I can't see them.
Yeah. They're supposed to be rockets. So this is just some of the stuff I do. So I try to make my portraiture cinemagraphs, and that's how I want to sort of make myself different to other portrait photographers, is to add that little bit of moving element, a bit of that wow factor.
It's quite engaging because you kind of get a sense of almost what the atmosphere was like and what the experience was like there, rather than just a single shot in the moment.
Yeah.
Do you have to kind of capture any footage as you're doing these things, or do you kind of all do this in post?
So there's a few ways. All of them require post, but sometimes I like to record the footage, but that's not always possible. So then sometimes I just work from my photograph. But if you're going to use footage, the movement is more natural, so it's best if you do use footage, but it's sometimes hard.
Also good if you don't really necessarily always need it.
Yeah.
So maybe, do you want to show us a couple of other ones that you've got there? Maybe your favourites,
My favourites.
if it's possible to choose like a favourite child.
Yes, I kind of like this one. I always like to play with like really creepy stuff, but make it very beautiful at the same time.
Yeah,
so
wow.
this is sort of creepy.
It's a really
beautiful.
subtle effect, right? Like, but it's kind of adds to the photo because you can't. Sometimes you don't even notice it to start with.
Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's like over the top. I
Yep.
try to keep it subtle because that's where the magic is. Yeah. Kind of like this one.
Oh, nice.
So for me, like a good cinematograph has to start off with a good photo. If the photo is bad to begin with, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, you might be
as
like
well, yeah.
get distracted by sort of like a bad composition.
Yeah.
Yeah, more than anything. Do you kind of have like a favourite place to shoot in Sydney? What's your kind of go-to in terms of that process?
So I try to go to places that have like a lot of nature in it, because nature just naturally, when it flows in the winds, it looks like it's looping. So anywhere with nature, maybe sea, water, the Blue Mountains, they're all good.
Yeah, nice. Cool. All right, well, getting some people in the chat who are joining us now. If you're just coming in, we've got James here who's going to take us through a little bit of his work around, I guess, looking at cinemagraphs and kind of looping things in After Effects and working with photography there. So thanks for joining us. I've got a question here from Scott. It says, what drives your creative ideas? And do you have a camera with you at all times, or do you just capture things as you see them?
Yeah, I'm one of those people who carry my camera like wherever I go. People know me as like the guy with the camera.
The camera guy.
For me, I just want to get ideas from my head to like the image. So it's a constant process, and the more I work on it, the more better I can get the ideas out of my head.
How do you get them out of your head?
So you know what you want, but you don't know how to get there. And you just gotta keep on working, just keep making. You'll get better and better over time until you can sort of build that muscle so you can actually make whatever you want in your head.
It's good advice, I think, because like especially if you're like starting out in photography or After Effects, either or both, it's sort of hard to know where to start sometimes. But I think the more you just get into that habit of doing and always having something ready to go, like you can kind of develop, like you said, your muscle memory, so it gets easier and quicker as you go. Cool. All right. Well, how about we jump into what you're going to take us through today?
Yeah.
Do you want to start by maybe like going to the image that you had? I think it was on Instagram, so we can get a bit of a preview of it.
So today we're gonna just try and make like your neon light photos like pop a bit with a bit of movement. I'm doing neon lights because Vivid is currently on at the moment. I feel like it's perfect for people just to sort of create better content with their Vivid photos.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I have heaps of Vivid photos and they just sit there and I don't know what to do with them. And usually, I think this is probably giving you a bit of a preview, but you're going to show us how we can actually use them, because mine always turn up a bit like dark and muddy, and I'm always a bit disappointed because you're kind of there in the moment and it's like really lovely and beautiful, but how do you even get that? So this is super exciting for me because I'm going to take these and use them later. These techniques.
Okay.
Cool. All right, well, why don't jump in?
Okay, so we're just going to start off with editing the photo. So I'm going to jump into Lightroom. I use Lightroom to edit my colors when it comes to photography. So first we're just going to do basic adjustments just to get the image looking right and normal to the eyes. So I always like to start off with just color correction. So we're not grading yet, we're just correcting colors so it looks as natural as possible. So usually I just jump into the basic panel, bring up the exposure. I usually like less highlights, more shadows. Actually, I usually always crop first, so you've got to crop to wherever you're going to post. So for this, it's going to be Instagram, which is 4:5, which is the standard. Just going to pull this down and rotate it a bit. I usually like to bring my saturation down a bit, just to make it a bit more matte.
Do you tend to shoot raw or?
Like always shoot raw and underexposed, because it's easier to sort of bring back the highlights than to recover them if they're blown out. So,
often if it's like way too bright, there's nowhere to bring it back from the dead.
Like even this photo, it just starts off really, really dark, and I just bring it back up like really easily in raw. Yeah. So that's a bit bright. We can make it darker. I always jump into lens corrections and enable profile corrections. So every single lens you shoot with will have a bit of distortion. And by enabling profile corrections, it sort of automatically fixes the distortion. And just quickly have a look.
So you're adjusting the temperature there. Are you looking, what sort of temperature are you looking on like a photo like this?
Usually you try to get the skin tones like as natural as possible. So if you're going to go red, it's going to be too warm. If you're going to go cool, it's going to be too dark. So I always aim for like the correct light for the skin tone.
So that's a kind of good marker to use when you're trying to, I guess, find what that right temperature is.
Yes, good skin tones, or if there's whites in the image, but this image has no whites because all the neon lights are like different colored. So yeah, usually the whites or the skin tones. And yeah, I think this is a good starting point.
We had a question which was around how many photos do you take to get like that right shot?
I take heaps, so I usually put mine on burst mode, and I usually get like the subject to sort of change the pose every time I click. So heaps. Heaps.
Do you have like heaps of hard drives just stacked up at home?
Yeah, heaps. Terabytes worth.
Terabytes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So after you feel like it's all right for the correction, you can just play around the colors. I can't say there's like a specific way to go through this. It's more of a play, and that's the fun of it. Fun of the creativity is just playing around the colors.
And this is looking at color grading at this point?
Yeah, color grading. So color grading, you pretty much just set the tones to what you like them, and the hues and the saturations. This photo, it's already strong. I don't feel like I can add much to it, much of my own character. So, but I'm still just gonna have a play and see what I can do. So I'm just gonna see what these picks. So I'm using this color picker tool, which changes the color based on where you pick it on the image. So if you're going to go to the blues, it will change the blues. And if you're going to go to the reds, it will change the reds and magentas. I find it just much funner and more intuitive using the color picker tool.
Yeah. Festus was wondering if you used a wide angle lens for this one.
So I used a 35mm. I can't see the metadata. It's usually here. But I usually shoot 35, so I'm assuming this is 35.
Yeah. Cool.
Actually, where is the metadata? No, this is a wide angle lens, actually.
Oh, there you go.
Data here is
good eye,
wide
Festus.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, just play around the HSL, saturation, luminance.
We were talking a bit about this earlier, but you were saying like you often kind of look to grade it with some tones that make it a little bit more like unique to your style.
Yeah. So with photography, I reckon the color of the photos is pretty important to like your own unique voice and aesthetic. Yeah.
How do you sort of decide what that is? Is that just a personal preference?
Yeah, again, I'd say just go through a lot of photos, edit, and then you sort of pick up what you like, what you don't like, and what you want in your photos. So it's just a matter of doing heaps, and then you'll develop it. I get this question asked a lot, and yeah, it's just a matter of workload.
Yeah. I think you were saying before that you kind of often tend towards like a green or like a cyan sort of.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
When it comes to split toning, so I'll show you split toning. I'm notorious for just doing too much green cyans in my highlights.
I think that comes down to as well, like just what you like,
Yeah.
and what you kind of keep coming back to, and you just find that like, oh, it just happens that most of my photos end up having this hue. I think that's sort of ends up being your thing. Yeah.
So let's go and play with this. So you hold down Alt and you just drag through the highlights just to sort of see it at 100%. And see what you like. See, for me, I'm already naturally gravitating towards the greens and blues. Just a bit. Play with the shadows.
So when it says split toning, what does that actually mean? Like, what's it doing there?
So it's separating the highlights and the shadows, and then what you get to do is add like a slight hue to either the highlights or a slight hue to the shadows, and it sort of balances between the two.
Right. Yep.
The brightest and the darkest. And yeah, so I usually sharpen here as well. usually I just zoom into 100% and just see what it's affecting.
Mm-hmm.
So with sharpening, you want to balance the sharp edges, but once you introduce sharp edges, it also creates noise. So you want to find that balance between sharpness and noise.
Mm-hmm.
So just have a look. So in radius, you just want to make it big enough just so it affects the edges. Same with detail, and same with masking. And yeah.
Because it's often hard when you take photos at night, right? When you often do get quite a bit of noise, or you can get that sort of stuff. So does the sharpening help reduce that and kind of allow you to adjust it?
Sharpening does not really help with noise.
Right.
So there is noise reduction. That should help with noise.
Imagine also the quality of the lens helps with that sort of thing too.
Camera. So you can play with the noise reduction, but this does the opposite effect of sharpening, which makes everything more blurrier. But
sort of softer, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to do that like that. Oops. And you can also play around with calibration. I don't know how to explain it, but it does dramatically change the mood of your images. I'm just going to slightly change it up.
If you're like creating, say, like a series of these photos, how do you make sure that all of the settings are sort of similar between each of them?
Yep. So usually when you're happy with one photo, you can sort of create your own preset.
Okay, yeah.
So with presets, you just press this plus button here and then create preset.
Yeah.
And just tick all the settings that you want copied over to another photo. So they have all these options. Once you create it, I'm just going to call this neon. Then you should have your own preset, and then you can just apply it to other photos. I don't have any other photos here to show you, but that's how you create a preset.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I sometimes find that if I'm doing a couple in a row and I want it to feel like a little mini series, it's hard to remember sort of what adjustments I made where or that sort of stuff. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
So I'm pretty happy with this right now. So I'm just going to export it into the folder.
Are there certain things you're looking for in that image that kind of tell you that it's ready to go? Like, what kind of gives you a sense that you're happy with it?
I'd say just edit till you're happy with it. I'll look at the brightness, but because we're going to edit this, I know it's going to still change again.
Yeah.
So, but I just usually look for something that just looks good to your eye.
The balance, yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay. And that's been exported. So the next part is we're going to jump into After Effects, and we're going to introduce the neon lights glowing.
Cool.
So After Effects is a pretty scary program if you're new to it, so I'm just going to go through it slowly.
Perfect.
Feel free to ask any questions.
I will. Yeah. You too as well. People in the chat, ask questions.
So we're just going to create a new composition. Again, Instagram settings, 1350, 1080. I think 30 FPS is probably optimal for Instagram. Just 10 seconds. And I'm going to call this comp loop. So we're going to make a loop. So I'm just going to drag our photo in to this one and bring it into the composition. So a composition is sort of just like a fresh PSD.
Yep.
Yeah, just adding whatever. Yeah. Oops. I'm going to reset this to standard so you guys can follow along. So if you're following along, this is how your After Effects should look like. So what we want to do with this is sort of separate the foreground from the background and the middle ground. So the foreground is going to be the subject, the background is going to be the wall, and the middle ground is going to be every single glow layer there is. So to do this, we're just going to duplicate this twice, rename the bottom one background. I'm going to lock it so it doesn't move. So the foreground, so we're going to make the foreground. So with the foreground, we want to cut out the subject. So I do that by using this pen tool or the shortcut O. What we're basically going to do is just go along the edges and just cut her out.
Cool. And would you use like a Wacom for something like this typically?
Yeah, definitely. Using our mouse is just unbearable and it's pretty bad for hands. And Wacom makes it like pleasant, very pleasant.
Yeah, much easier. We had a question around the sort of presets one. Festus was wondering if you can like record an action like you can with Photoshop, or are they the sort of a very similar thing?
You can't record an action, but that's what a preset pretty much
Essentially
is.
does
Is
what
all
the
these
same-
settings
Yeah.
the action does.
Yeah. So I think to answer that is, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just in the different program. Question from Flynn, who wants to know, how did you learn how to pose people?
I'd have like multiple ways of posing people. Sometimes I'd tell them just to like make like a Renaissance painting and just to get them to read poses. Sometimes I have the camera on selfie mode and let them pose themselves, because usually they're just happy with how they look.
Right, okay,
And
that's interesting.
If that doesn't work, every time I click, I tell them just to subtly change the pose, so we've got like a wide variety to use from.
Do you work with a lot of different people who kind of are your models? Are they your friends? I guess, how do you find those people to work with?
Yeah, so I started off with friends, and once you build confidence, you can start like working with models, and people start just up. Once they see your work, people want to work with you eventually. Yeah. Is it
a lot through Instagram that you just chat with them and organise that sort of stuff?
Yeah, for me, it was mainly through Instagram.
Yeah.
Go around.
So you're not doing it like super detailed here. You're kind of still keeping it a bit rough.
It's gonna go rough because it is going on Instagram. It's small and people can't really tell the edges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is like quite similar to, I guess, if you're familiar with drawing paths in Photoshop or Illustrator. You're kind of using the same techniques. You're pulling the Bezier curves and
yeah, definitely. I like to think of After Effects as the Photoshop of video.
Yep.
So it's they do have very similar tools and whatnot, but it's just more better for video in After Effects.
Yeah, more compatible.
Okay, so she's cut out now, which is cool.
Do you actually shoot with a tripod when you're doing these things?
So when I shoot video, I would use a tripod.
Yeah.
But I'm a photographer. I started off as a photographer, so I'm more natural just using handheld.
Yeah.
And that's how layers separated. So we're going to create a glow layer with a blending style. So we're just going to make sure our layers are named, because that just helps us workflow and color. Okay. So we're going to use blending styles just to create the glow. So blending style is just the way we blend the top layer with the bottom layer. So we're going to use add, which takes the brightest pixels in the image and blends it with the bottom. So add would, if this works, it should make it brighter. Yeah.
Really getting that glow now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting, because like you could have tried to push that in Lightroom, but you've saved that for here because you know that's an effect you want to add on.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to make markers so it's easier to go back and forth. We're going to close up our timelines just to make it more efficient.
Is there a reason why you're keeping it to like quite short?
Yep, I try to keep my loop short for Instagram, because the longer your video is, the more bigger the file size is. And when they upload a big file size to Instagram, they compress it a lot. So we try to keep it as short as possible, so it minimizes the compression, keeping your video sharp and intact.
Yeah, there's nothing worse when you've kind of gone through the effort of trying to like make something perfect and really beautiful, and it looks amazing on your enormous screen, and then you put it on Instagram and it's like
it's just blurry. And then you hear everyone complain about the compression and whatnot.
Yeah. I feel like I've read a lot of comments about compression.
Okay. So
Fix
we're
it, Instagram.
gonna use keyframes just to sort of animate the light. So keyframes is sort of like setting points for A and B. So in traditional animation, you would have a keyframe for the end point and the back point. So think about a car. You're going to start A and B. You're going to have a keyframe A to keyframe B, and After Effects is automatically going to interpolate the time between the two. So it's hard to explain, but it's easier to show. So just for fun, we're going to animate her going from A to B. So if this is A, we're going to put a keyframe for A, and at 1 second we're going to go to B, And this should automatically make it go from A to B. But
Looks so natural.
but we don't want to animate the position here. We want to animate the glow layer, and we want to turn it on and off. So we're going to be, so A will be 0 and B will be on, which is 100%. So it's going to work with the opacity. So let's just delete this. So you open up the opacity option with T. We're going to go 1% and set it at 100%. Then we're going to go to the beginning and set it at 0. So we play this back. It should automatically turn on. And what we want to do at the end is make it turn back off. So we're going to go set a keyframe right before it ends, and at the very ending, we're going to go to 0%. So now it should automatically have like a loop that goes on and off the lights.
So that's so like at the end, it's seamless, so it continues to loop.
Yeah, so the end would be exactly the same as beginning, and that's how the loop is made. Yeah. And yeah, so the next step we're going to do is sort of mask out where we want the glow to happen. So pretty much we want a layer for every single neon light. It might sound tedious, but the more work you put into it, I guess the better the effect is. It's actually not too hard. So to create a mask, back to our pen tool, which is up here. I'm just going to go around this cake here, roughly.
Where did you shoot this?
So this was, I forgot what the show was called, but it's like a candy store show.
Oh, okay.
Sugar Crush. I can't remember what this is called, but this was in Melbourne, and there's one in Sydney as well, on top of
really?
Maya.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So we play this back. We've got the mask, and only the cake is glowing, but the edges are a bit rough. So to sort of fix that, we're going to change the feathering to 100. And now we should just have one glowing light.
Nice.
And since we already set the keyframes, all we can do is just duplicate the layer and just add a different mask to a different part of the image. So I'm just going to create different masks. We are going to go around the triangle. Again, feather it 100. I'm going to make one for the peach. So we're going to delete the mask again.
How do you find out about like these sorts of places that have these beautiful walls and backdrops and things that you can kind of play with?
So this one in particular was just like a friend recommended.
Okay,
but
yeah.
it's just either through Instagram, Google, and yeah, events.
I'm always jealous when I see people at great places and you're like, how did you find out about that?
And
then you realise everyone else has found out about it and late to the game.
Yeah. So we'll just do this for a couple more stuff. Let's do these lips. So yeah, we should have a few lights going on and off now. And this is like the most basic way to animate these lights. I'm going to show you another way that gives you a bit more control and movement. So what we want to do is sort of animate the light to follow along this arrow here. So to do this, again, we're going to duplicate our layer. We're going to delete all our keyframes and our masks. Let's just delete these. Delete our mask.
Would you go back and rename your layers just so you kind of know which one's applying to what?
Yeah, I usually do.
Yeah.
Always. It's always best to try to keep as organized as possible.
Yeah.
So the arrow we're gonna. So we want the glow on this arrow to start here and end up here. So we're just gonna create a path for the glow. And then we're going to be using an effect called stroke. So stroke is really good. It's the first thing I used when I started After Effects. And it's good for like animating signatures and calligraphy. But here I'm going to use stroke just to animate the light following this arrow. So in effects, we're just going to look for stroke. So we're going to select mask 1, which is automatically selected, and we're going to increase the brush size just so it covers the arrow.
Mm-hmm.
But we also want to soften it, like feather it. So to do this, we're just going to go into brush hardness and go to 0. So to get this animated, we're going to put keyframes for the end and start point. So keyframe for the end, we're going to go to the beginning, go to 0%, so it should animate on.
Nice.
And then we want it to animate off. So a keyframe for start, we're going to go to the end, make it come off. So this should go on, then off, yep. And then in paint style, we want it to reveal the glow layer. So we're just going to go reveal original image.
So that's kind of doing the mask kind of effect.
Yeah, mask effect. And what's good about this is that it's also like the other ones where all you need to do, so the keyframes are set and all you need to do is just mask out different parts of the image.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to keep doing this for the other neon lights and just build up the image.
How long would you sort of typically spend on something like this?
So they're all different.
Yeah.
This one is pretty quick, so this one goes for about like half an hour, but sometimes if I really, really want to make something really nice, I can spend like up to half a day. Yeah, just experimenting. So we're going to delete our mask. I'm just going to mask out like other parts. Oops. Select a layer. We follow this. Just because our keyframes are already set, these will just automatically follow along. It's just a matter of duplicating, repeating the mask, and changing it up.
Would you go through and get like super detailed on things like the sprinkles in the background, or because it depends?
Yeah, it depends. For this one, I wouldn't, because I don't think it'll add like that much difference. So I'll just go for like a wide mask. So we'll duplicate this again, delete the mask, and just make it go this way.
Do people sort of come to you after you put something up like this on Instagram and ask you to do a similar effect on something that they've shot, or like, you know, or even just work together to try and do it?
All the time.
Yeah, yep.
all the time. I've always get asked questions on how to do it as well.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of tutorials on Instagram already.
Yeah. Do you have things that are like your kind of trade secret, or
no,
I'm usually
I'm
pretty
happy to share and trying to teach the community.
It's good.
Yeah. So we're just going to do this lollipop. Oops.
So simple once you've kind of set everything up to start with the keyframes. So like it means you can just apply it to everything else rather than have to set them again and then make sure they're in the right spot. Because I've definitely done that and spent way too much time having to do that.
So now it's just a matter of masking out stuff because everything's already set. So yeah, that's the lollipop. Let's do this stick. Oops.
Would you go through and sort of like stagger any of the lights?
Yeah, we'll do that at the end.
Okay,
So
yeah. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself there.
Oops. So we can go around these love hearts. This is just a very lazy way to do them.
I suppose, once you sort of, it happens in the space of 6 seconds, that sort of detail isn't like that noticeable. You can kind of be a little bit rough with it.
So we'll just play this back just to see how it's looking. I'm going to do this cherry one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just going to make a basic one for it.
Would you be able to put like a sort of flicker effect on some of them individually, or?
Yeah, so white flickering is just like more keyframes. So
Okay. Yeah.
it's just because right now we have it going on and off slowly, but we want it to flicker. You just add more keyframes to make it go on and off faster. So we'll just try it on with this cherry one.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got our keyframes here, and we just want to bring them really, really tight together. I'm just going to duplicate it, and duplicate it again. So now these should flicker, but it's a bit sort of crazy. That works.
Yeah. I guess you kind of want to get a bit of that natural effect
Yeah, it's a
on the flicker,
yeah.
so it's not, doesn't feel like it's too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll just spread these out a bit.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very cool. Do you are you always looking to kind of put this on Instagram, or what sort of other outputs do you have, or places you'd put this?
So for these ones, I usually put them on Instagram, but the skills I teach you in making these work in like advertising. They work on like anything, banners. I've actually learnt my techniques through working in broadcast. So when you watch the news, like on either 9 or 7, the screens, they're always looping. And that's sort of how I developed this technique. It's sort of they always had to loop, and I just was bringing my profession to like my hobby, which is photography, and I'm just marrying those two together.
That's super interesting. So you mean like when you have a presenter and they've got the big kind
big screens on the back?
Right.
It's always looping. Like, people don't notice this stuff, but
it's super subtle. I've actually never really noticed.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
And yeah. Oops. Let's just see how it goes.
Festus was saying that he's a technique around getting people to loosen up, and they sort of ask like, hey, great boots, where did you get them? And they kind of get a bit more familiar with that sort of stuff. Yeah. Do you have any techniques that you use to get people to feel a bit more comfortable? Because I mean, I know I've worked with people on shoots, and sometimes they're just like, oh, I'm really, really...
You should just have a conversation with them. It's pretty good. Try to get to know them better and just see why they're doing it, and that usually helps.
Yeah. Cool.
And yeah, I can keep going. I'm pretty happy with this right now, but if you want, you just can keep going. So the next part we want to do, like you said just before, because everything is happening at the same time, it's kind of monotonous, so we want to stagger each frame. So we're just going to do this by selecting, we're going to just do it manually. There is plugins out there that automatically does it, but we're just going to stagger each one.
So that's essentially dragging the time over.
Yeah. So they all start at different times.
Yeah.
Okay. But now this breaks the loops because now it ends. So the way we fix this is sort of, we're going to split the layer where it breaks. So Control-Shift-D would kind of split it. And we're going to bring it back to the beginning. So back bracket will bring them back to the beginning.
Oh, wow.
Now they should loop and start at different times.
That's such a good tip. I have always done this very manually.
And yeah, now we've enhanced our photo with glowing neons. So
Amazing.
To further sell this effect, we want to see the reflections of the neons on the ground. This sort of adds a bit more magic. So to do this, I'm just going to create another comp. I'm going to call it master. Oops, actually.
Just a question from Scott, who was just curious about what sort of scenarios do you think are good for using this technique when it comes to like black and white imagery?
So I don't think that it changes. So black and white photography imagery is just the same color. Yeah.
Okay. So just you could apply the same techniques,
with black and white. Yeah.
Do you shoot much in black and white?
I won't say I shoot much in black and white. Black and white is just like an editing technique where you just take out the saturations or the color in your photo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to get the reflections on the ground, we're gonna need to cut out the feet again because it does cover the ground. I do this by just copying the foreground, put it into the new comp, and now it's already cut out. We're gonna duplicate the loop. We're gonna flip the composition, so transform, flip vertical. We're gonna bring it back down, and we're gonna create a mask just above her feet, so we don't see the ground again. And then we're just gonna call this reflection. Then we're gonna change the opacity, just so it looks like a reflection. And to me, that already looks good, but we also want to add a bit of perspective. So we're gonna make it a 3D layer, which is this cube here, and you just want to turn that 3D on. Change the X position so it slightly fits better. I'm gonna put this back up and just drag it out. And because reflections aren't usually like perfect, so we're gonna add a bit of Gaussian blur.
Okay.
Just to again further sell the look. So Gaussian. And let's just make it very subtle. 5.
I love how much it's just like all of this is like layers of just attention to detail. Like you could have left the reflection as it is, but I sort of love that you can kind of keep building it, and when you think you can keep pushing it even further, just so that when you look at it, it's really, really good.
Yep. So now the ground should reflect as well. Yep. If it's not too obvious, you can also make it brighter. And yeah, they reflect. Okay, cool.
Wow.
And the model is slightly lost, so we can also easily just do color grading in After Effects. It's just the same as Photoshop, so we just want to make it a bit brighter with curves.
Are you using a plugin for when you just brought that up, or is that?
All right, yeah, that's So I don't know why After Effects doesn't have it yet, but every other program seems to have like a really shortcut to access the effects.
Yeah.
So Control Space. This is a plugin. And
Sort of handy when you know exactly what you're after, as opposed to digging through lots of panels of effects and everything like that.
Just less clicks.
Yeah.
And once you're happy with that, I usually like to add like my own music track to it. Because it just adds more narrative to the frame, more storytelling, more of a mood. And for me, it's 50% of the actual image is the audio. So
right, cool.
So I've already found a track for this. I'm just going to drag it into the timeline. So the audio is never the exact same time as my loop. So the way I fix that is to sort of time the loop to the audio, and I do that by sort of just cutting these at the end and then pre-comping it.
Do you want to, could you just describe what pre-comping is?
Pre-comping, the way I like to work with pre-comping is think of it like Photoshop folders, where you just add as many elements as you want into the folder. And the folder is on its own layer, so you're pretty much just adding elements into your pre-comps.
And then you can affect that pre-comp.
The whole pre-comp.
And put something.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives you a bit more range of things.
So you're just grouping elements together, sort of just like a folder.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to change the time of the pre-comp and match it with the audio. So the audio here is 612. So I'm just going to get a bit slower and match it. Go to the end. Oops. And this should play back.
We had a question from Festus, who was wondering if there's ways you can make your own keyboard shortcuts like you can in Photoshop.
Yeah, you can in After Effects. So there is an edit, keyboard shortcuts.
Easy.
And then Yeah, you can just assign your own shortcuts here with your own letters. I like how it's all laid out just so you can see what's where.
It's a good kind of like place to remind yourself of what the shortcuts are.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. Okay.
I sometimes watch tutorials and people just constantly like going around. You're like, but wait, what did you do? What was that shortcut?
Yeah. And this is pretty much it.
Nice.
There's a bit of a flick. That's because I left business, so I'm just going to make that shorter.
Noticed that. Good eye.
Whoops.
I noticed in your other one on Instagram, you kind of had some little almost like glows on certain elements and stuff. Would you kind of put that in as well?
Yeah, I would. The ones on my Instagram is a plugin, which I don't have on this computer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's Starglow, but you can sort of fake it. I'm not too sure how to fake it here.
Let's put you on the spot.
We'll just try, yeah.
Let's experiment. Let's see.
All right. I think it's a directional blur. Directional blur. Then we're going to make this bigger, but we just want to affect the highlights, right? So we're going to go back to add.
So this is using those blending modes again.
Yeah, blending modes.
Yeah,
so
very versatile.
this is just native ones. And it does add a bit of streaking.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can make the stroke smaller. Maybe. So it adds a flare, but it's not the exact same.
Not quite the same, yeah. Because your one, I think it was really nice. You have it's super clean and crisp on. So now it's just little points that are coming up.
Yeah,
cool. On the audio, I think it'd be really interesting to know what where you go to find those tracks and what you're looking for.
So I just usually use stock. What I use a lot is Looperman. So Looperman is just a website for DJs, and they like to share their samples and loops with each other. And I just take the loops, and
that's
it's all royalty free.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool. I wouldn't have thought, but that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's sort of mostly what we've got for today. Is there anything else that you wanted to share, or maybe we could go back? Actually, what would be interesting is to go back to your Instagram just to have a look at some of the other ones that you've done.
Yep. First, I also take you through this export setting. So we're just going to go through media.
This is a very
encoder.
crucial part. My apologies. You want to get it out of After Effects for Instagram.
Yeah. Just going to open media encoder. Usually takes a while. Okay.
So why do you use something like media encoder as opposed to the standard export stuff in After Effects?
I think Adobe has transitioned to media encoder, and they prefer creators using media encoder to create the stuff. So there's just more options, more varied options, and more presets in media encoder than in the After Effects one.
Yeah.
So I always export a H.264, and I'll just use the high bitrate presets. I don't change anything else, and I'll just export it to the folder. I'll call this, I usually name it upload. And
and then it renders and then ready to go.
Pretty much.
How do you get it onto your phone? It's something I always feel like people have a good hack for.
So most people would use Dropbox and download it off Dropbox, but I use an app where I just wirelessly send it to my phone.
Yeah.
Sort of like an AirDrop for Android, I guess.
Cool, yeah, that's really smart. I text it to myself. I think that's probably the longest way to do it. Always takes forever.
And this should be it.
Nice. In After Effects, do you ever use? I think I've kind of touched on this in stuff I've done in the past, where you can use code to put a loop into the actual.
I usually use code, so loop in, loop out.
Is that possible to show people just quickly? Is that something that's easy?
Oh, it's been a while.
Again, I'm putting you on the spot.
You can usually just Google with the code.
Yep.
But I think it's loop in, loop out.
Because I remember when I first learned how to kind of loop things, I think at the time, I don't even know if Instagram had videos at that point. So I think or maybe they did, but I know, I think there was always a way, you're trying to find ways to make it loop as like a movie file rather than just as a standard kind of, I guess, looking at, using Instagram to make it loop as opposed to looping on its own.
Yeah. Let me test my knowledge. I don't remember it specifically. So what's it? No, I don't remember it.
That's all right.
Google it.
Yeah, okay. So that's a good tip. Go Google what you can do. But essentially, I think as you can see on the screen there, you can kind of insert a little bit of code, which is super easy to find on Google, and you'll be able to actually get it to loop within After Effects itself once you export it.
Maybe this. Yeah, no, I don't know.
Anyway, cool. Well, maybe just before we finish up, do you want to just have a look? Can we have a look at some of the other ones that you've got on your Instagram? Maybe some other favourites that you've got that people are really loving?
So this one, I'll go through some of the Adobe ones. So this one did pretty well for Adobe.
Wow, that's amazing.
And this is also a really simple one. It's just a video file and it's just looping.
Yeah. So
no keyframes or anything. It's just on repeat.
How did you capture? What was the kind of process behind this one?
So it was on a tripod. It was on the camera, and I shot it at 120 FPS. So this is just normal vapor, but I'm playing it back really, really slowly, so it looks like it's coming out really slowly.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Cool.
That's it.
I always look at those ones with this like vapor or smoke, like a cup of tea that's kind of still steaming.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. I sort of still can't get my head around it.
Yeah. Let's see what else. I showed you that one. Just let me know if you want to click on anything in particular. So I usually split it up half cinemagraphs, which is my portrait work, and half travel. And yeah.
On the smoke one, actually, how do you mask that out? How do you kind of separate it?
So this one is there's no masking at all. It's just smoke, and what it is just looping the video into each other.
Right. Okay.
So this is really, really easy to do. I think I'll show the process here.
Oh, there you go. That's amazing.
Yeah. So this is a timeline. So all it does is just plays back.
Yeah, really cool. So everyone definitely check out James's Instagram, because obviously there's heaps there and more tutorials that you can get into, even more so than what we covered today, which is very exciting. There was one other question I saw in there, which might be a good one to wrap it up with, but how do you sort of find a balance between, like, I guess, life and photography? Because I imagine they kind of blur a lot. Do you ever think it's work life, or is it going to be...
I think as a creative, you're in the creative field because you absolutely love it. And if you don't have the passion to be in the creative field, like it's going to die out. So I try to make creativity like part of my life.
Hence the taking the camera around all the
time.
Yeah,
everywhere you go.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, thank you so much for being here. This has been incredibly insightful, and I have learnt a lot. I hope everyone else has. The replay for this will be up probably tomorrow, so if you've kind of just come in at the end, or if you're coming back for it, that's when you can grab a copy of it. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Come back next week. See ya. Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of the Digital Product Creative Challenge. With me, I'm Liv, and I'll be taking you through a couple of things in XD today. If you missed last week, that's where we started this off. Generally speaking, what we're looking at over the course of the next 4 weeks is how to sort of look at building a feature within an existing app. So going through a couple of processes and techniques that you would typically use within a product team and using XD to execute on those things. So last week, we looked at a couple of different things, which I'll take you through and just recap. But essentially, what I've got here just to start is a couple of just overview slides. So as I kind of mentioned, what we're looking in this creative challenge to do is to sketch, test, and design a new feature within an existing app. So that app, if you missed last week, is called Wildcard. You can actually go and download it. It's available for people in Australia. So if it's a sort of banking app. So if you want to, that's I think wildcard.money. You can sign up, you can get into it, you can play around and see sort of a bit of a frame for what we're looking at the moment. If not, I think I mentioned this last week, you can also use more apps that you're familiar with. So if you're in a different country and you want to use a banking app that you have and that you're more familiar with, go ahead and do that, because that's kind of what we'll be looking at for this feature. All right, so just to give you a bit of an overview, I'll try and zoom in on a couple of these things. So week 1, we really focused on ideation and sketches. So that was looking about, I guess, getting some ideas out onto the table and figuring out what we want to test with people, and using some techniques like crazy eights and concept cards. Week 2, so this week, what we're looking at is wireframes and prototypes. So we've gone away, we've tested a few of our ideas. Now we're thinking, we're ready, we're confident that this is potentially like a way to move forward, and we think this is the right idea to take forward for this feature. So we're going to start to build things up. And I guess a word that I'll probably start using a lot is fidelity for these sorts of things. So really what we're looking at we're going from low fidelity to high fidelity. So we're going from really kind of lo-fi things like sketches, things that are really easy, and building up as we go, so that by the end of the 4 weeks, or the 3 weeks, sorry, what we'll have is a really polished kind of feature that we can then hand over and talk about in week 3, which is around production and polish. So just to really quickly recap on last week in case you missed it, you can watch it, it should still be up on YouTube. But essentially we looked at framing, so using a how might we question to frame the problem. We looked at ideation, so using crazy eights as a technique to get ideas out and think about rapidly ideating. And then we looked at making those ideas into concept cards, which is essentially things that we can go out into the wild and test. So the problem we had, and the problem we're trying to look at throughout this entire creative challenge, is how do we let people easily split bills? So it's pretty universal. Everyone generally goes out and has a dinner with a friend, and you kind of end up paying for it yourself, or they do, and you have to go through that whole rigmarole of who paid for what and how much am I paying you. So this is looking about, I guess, incorporating that kind of very familiar behaviour into an app, which, funnily enough, I don't know about other countries, but here in Australia at least, we don't have many apps, in fact banking apps, that can do that. So this is a really cool feature that would actually be really useful, I think. All right, so as I mentioned, that's our problem. How might we easily allow users to split bills with friends? So that was our how might we statement from last week. So what do we learn? So I took this out to some friends. Now these are like really top level, some ideas that came out from that. I'd be super curious if you guys took this out and tested with your friends and saw what they said, because this would be really good to sort of amalgamate them. But what I did was I took our concept cards and I put them in front of people, and I sort of said, you know, what do you prefer? What do you like? Why? Really digging into what they're sort of reading into these ideas. And so the couple of things that came out of this for me that I thought were useful to take ahead into the next round. Now, this is pretty basic and pretty like high level. You might typically have like a lot more answers. You might have some quotes from people, and those are all really, really valuable resources to have when you've done testing. So what came out for me when I spoke to people about this was people really love notifications as a way to remind them to split bills, because often they'll kind of forget. I guess they'll go home, they'll go to bed, they'll forget that they pay for that stuff, and then it sort of comes down to like, oh, I need to dig into, looking how much it was, who had what, did I save a receipt, all that sort of stuff. So notifications were really good, so that at the time they made a transaction, they would be reminded or prompted to split the bill. People liked the idea of that bot, which was really funny, but also they said that they didn't really see themselves using that. So that kind of rules out the bot for now. People felt that tapping on a transaction was probably the simplest interaction. So that was like one of the ideas that we had, which was just really just going into your transaction list, tapping on the latest one, and then being able to split it from there. And I thought this was interesting. Most people said it reminded them of sharing a ride on Uber, and they liked that comparison. And I think that's interesting, and the reason I wanted to highlight that was because when we go into the next phase of developing this idea, we probably will start to draw on a few behaviours and patterns that are really familiar to us in other apps. Because I think with product design, unless you're introducing a really, really new behaviour, you really want to like leverage patterns that exist already, because you don't want to really throw people into the deep end and make them feel like they just have no idea what to press. A really good feature will kind of take on some patterns people are familiar with, but not overwhelm them with something completely new and different. And I think that's a really good, interesting comparison that someone's made there. So we can kind of use something like that to inform how we then take this next part forward and start to design. So what we're going to look at today are 3 different things. And I'm going to touch on sort of all of these in a pretty high level way. I think this generally applies to this whole Creative Challenge series, as I'm trying to make it really simple and easy for you to follow a really basic framework for incorporating a new feature into a product. If you're working in a product team, you'll probably know that there's 1,000 different ways to break it down and do these sorts of things. If you're not, I think this is a really good intro into just the top level ideas of techniques, tips, tricks, things that you can do in the process around doing something like this. So the first one we're going to look at is quickly looking at a bit of a user flow. So that's sort of mapping out what I guess a prototype might look like, or what the journey that someone is taking as they're trying to complete the goal, which is to split the bill. Then we're going to look at quickly wireframing in XD. And so that's creating that low fidelity mock-up of the key screens that we want to look at. And then lastly, we're just going to quickly link it up with prototyping in XD. So again, all of this is really going through that same cycle of building up something to then have an item at the end to test with, which again, I would go out and I'd test and I keep testing until you really have no time left to test, because the more information we're getting back from users, the better, the more confident we'll feel taking this into production and getting it out there. All right, so the first thing I've done as part of this process is I've actually just changed our how might we statement into a goal or a user story. And the reason I've done that is just to make it really easy for me to understand what is the journey someone's going on to complete the goal that they've set out to complete. So the goal in this case is, as a wildcard user, I want to easily split a bill I've just paid for with friends, so I'm not out of pocket. That's a typical structure for a user story. So as a user, I want to do X so that I can do Y, or whatever that is. So again, you might go through a few different iterations of these in a similar way to a how might we. There isn't the perfect user story, so you might actually have to refine this a bit more. But that's kind of your basic structure. All right, so I'm going to open up a separate file that I've got here. I didn't mention, but there are assets which you can download. They should be at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending if you're on YouTube or the live chat. Can't quite remember. But I have prepared most of the wireframes sort of in advance, but I'm going to walk through how to create these anyway. But you should be able to have those and then play with them and adapt them however you like. Something I'll just flag and I'll mention is that I am using a font called GT Walsham, which is the brand font for Wildcard. Now, you probably won't have it, or if you do, that's great, but if you don't worry about it. There's a lot of similar ones on Google Fonts which are free to download. So I think maybe like Montserrat, or I think there's one called Poppins, which are really close to something like this. So feel free to grab those and just replace the fonts with it. So I just anticipated maybe getting that question at some point. All right, so What I'm going to do is I'm going to start building this flow. Now I'm just going to drop this down to a smaller thing. So what I want to do is essentially map out each of the steps that someone's going to take while they are completing, I guess, the different actions to get to the goal of splitting a bill. So the way I'm going to do this is super lo-fi. Again, like I'm trying to be as quick as possible because really essentially at this point, I want to quickly work to get something in front of people and get them to test it. And this is really for my reference and the team's reference, so we kind of are all on the same page as to what we're designing. So the first thing I want to say is what's the first action that someone's going to take? Well, they're going to pay for the item that they're paying for, so the bill essentially. So I'm going to put this user's card to pay for, say it's lunch at cafe. I'm just going to do this. So that's my first kind of step. That's the first action someone's going to take on this journey. That's the kind of trigger point. All right, so I've got this here. I'm going to just drop in this arrow, which I've already put in here, just so that I know that's kind of leading on to the next step. I might just reduce this size a bit. Just bring it here. Now, I'm essentially creating these sort of cards to form the different steps and linking them with arrows. And that's kind of helpful in that, like, if I have a separate journey or if this kind of goes off into a different path, it's quite easy just to show that it might diverge at some point. So you might have different options as you go. And this is going to be quite a, I guess, simple journey. What you might find is that things get more complicated and there's a lot to it, but I'm just trying to keep it quite high level for this one. All right, so my next step is user gets notification. They've paid. So they open, I'll say they've paid and prompted to, good if I could spell prompted, split bill. So after this, they're going to tap on notification. As you can see, like, these are not well designed. But the reason I'm doing this, and I've sort of also kept it on an artboard, for example, is because you might end up just printing this off and having this up on a wall so people can like add to it or change notes. So they'll be taken to the transaction screen. So like it'll kind of pop up and show them what the transaction was and a few details around the transaction. I'll just put this in, they'll tap on a button here to split. Sorry to people who are OCD and want these to be centered. It's paining me too, but I'm just trying to do this as fast as possible. They'll choose friends that they want to split the bill with. To split bill with. So I'll just put user. I have user here. What I would recommend is that actually you name that person if you can. In a user flow, like, I think user's a bit vague. So I think if you can kind of name that person more specifically, that's even better, because I think users could be anyone. And when you're trying to design something, you're really trying to empathize with people. And so using their name or using kind of what their profession or what they're doing to get more specific on that makes you kind of think from their lens on this, because they might have a particular way of thinking about it that might be a bit different to, say, someone else who might be one of your users. And you might break that down into segments and sort of gets a bit more complicated. But user's pretty generic, probably fine for this, but I think if you're getting more specific, you can kind of use that name. So they'll get, user gets confirmation. Oh wait, sorry. They would actually, I think in this instance, they would choose their friends, and then they would select confirm button. I think someone just asked about duplicating. I'm not quite sure what it is in Windows, but I'm holding down Alt or Option, sorry. Actually, it must be Alt in Windows, so Option on Mac and Shift just to keep it all in line. Here, so the next step, they've confirmed that that's what bill they want to split and who they want to split it with, and so they'll get user sees confirmation screen. So I'm breaking these into pretty small steps. You might make these a bit bigger depending on what you want to do. I just want to edit this artboard to make it a little bit bigger. As you can see, there's a lot of little steps within this, and I'm just continuing that. You also might want to number them as well. I think that's quite helpful. What you might end up doing as you go after this is you might replace these cards with I guess the wireframes and the screens, which we end up getting to. So you can all of it is really just making things easy for yourself and for other people to come in and read what's happening and just very quickly understand sort of what you're designing and what you're doing. So they've seen the confirmation screen. I think it'd be really good at this point if they wanted to like edit the amounts. I think this would be like a good point to do something like this, and I also don't think it's something that often comes up. Like, I think you can use, there's a couple of bill splitting apps like I think Splitwise, and there's a few others. It'd be very easy just to say, okay, let's just split it evenly, which is fine, but like inevitably you're probably going to have an instance where someone ordered the salad or someone brought a bit of wine and you don't want to split it evenly. So I think you want to be able to have an ability to edit those individual amounts that people say. So I think at this point you might see that everyone's splitting it evenly, but you can click on a few things to kind of confirm what the actual amount is that you want to do that. So user edits individual amounts. And then I will also think at this point you might want to put a note. So you know when you usually send people money, you kind of saying, okay, this is what this is for. Adds a note. And I think at this point you're probably confirming that they've done it. Like, I think what I'm just making a bit of like, essentially where like a flow like this comes from is your experience in testing with people. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you might also use something like a story map to map this out, or a few different ways. You might map out someone's day and their behaviors, but you're drawing upon your knowledge of what someone's, I guess, flow looks like based on what you've talked to them about. So I might have interviewed someone and they've told me that like, this is kind of what I would do normally and this is what I would like to do next. And so I'm drawing on that from my head and sort of trying to empathize and think, how would a user use something like this? So that's what's kind of telling me what might come next. Now, the thing about this is like, it's definitely step one, and it's probably not the most robust flow that you're going to have. You're going to probably find that there's all these other ones that kind of come into play and you haven't thought about. So I think in that instance, this is why we test it, and then we take it forward and we want to test whether this flow is accurate to what people would do, or if there's another step we've missed, another action that's really crucial to them completing that goal, because we might have forgotten something in there that is actually really important. All right, so user at this point, they've added a note, they've added their friends, they've edited all the different amounts, so they request to split. So that's kind of like sending it off, and I've used the word request there because I think I've kind of stolen that a bit from Uber, because you request to split a ride, right? And I think in this case it's sort of a similar action. You're requesting to split a bill, because I think you're not going to just send it off and people automatically are going to have their money reduced. I think you need to confirm with people, so they'll need to confirm in their side of the app that that's happened. And that's actually another flow that I need to look at as part of this feature, is like, what's that look like for someone else when they're going through this process of accepting that as well. So they've requested to split, and then I think at this point they would see like an updated transaction screen with split pending. Cool. So that's kind of my basic kind of flow here. And this will help me now design the wireframes. So I've got them paying, I've got notifications, I've got them tapping the notification. They'll look at that on the transaction screen and they'll press a button to say that they're confirming that, they'll choose friends, and they'll go through that process. So to quickly jump into wireframes now, I've started a little bit around setting this up. So what I want to do here is I want to essentially keep things really simple. Again, it's really low fidelity. And what I could do at this point is say use Wildcard's library of assets, which we actually talked about when I did the live stream last week around using libraries in XD. But I've kind of deliberately not done that because I find using color and using polished assets often means that people get very hung up on certain things like color and very minor details when they're actually, what you're trying to test is this really unbiased look at like, what does this flow feel like and are these correct and what's working and what's not. So I think in this instance, I'm just going to use black and white. I'm going to keep it really simple. On the assets in the files that we've put up, I've actually put all these things as components, so you can grab some of these elements and use them. I've just done that also to make my life a little bit simpler when I'm just making this. But one thing I will grab from this notification screen here is I'm going to open up my library of iOS elements because I actually want to kind of replicate what that looks like. So and make it a bit realistic so it's not completely foreign. So I'm just going to try and grab, which I'm going to unlock this, and I'm going to grab, or at least try and grab, this notification, which I didn't grab. Go through these. I'm just going to remove this. We'll go back and edit all these later. I wonder why I can't grab this. All right, let's delve into the layers. Notifications, there we go. That's probably the simplest way to do it. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to go back to my notification screen and I'm going to drop it in. And I've got this component already made. It's from the iOS library. It'll replicate that feeling of, all right, I've got a notification, and that's going to start all of the flow. So what I can do here is just quickly edit this. So I think there's usually a little logo here, which I may not have copied across, but that's fine. You can kind of add it in. So that is notification from Wildcard. I'm going to say the notification title is say it's 56 paid at cafe. And I might say in this like little notification here, something like, I should be better at this. This should be like a copywriting kind of exercise. I haven't really thought about what it would be, but it would be something like to prompt people to split. So tap through to split this bill with friends. All right, I might edit that a little bit just so it looks a bit nicer. So it's a bit more clearer. But essentially that's fine for now. That's all we really need. They want to get the sense that this happened now. I've just got this notification and that's going to start this flow. So this is the transaction screen from the Wildcard app. So on the app, you can go into your transaction list like you do on any other banking app, tap on a little cell on the transaction itself, and you'll pop up with this screen here. Right now, actually, if you go to that, it doesn't actually have that button. So what I'm doing is suggesting that we're going to add this button in, this split with friends button. And I'm actually just going to grab over here, I've already made, at least I thought I already made, I didn't make a secondary button. What I did. Anyway, so I've got a secondary button here. I'm making it secondary because I'm not assuming that people are going to make this their primary action at this point. I'm going to assume that people might want to, and they may have come through here in a different way, but it's not necessarily what they want to do. They also might want to mark this as an expense, which is another feature you can do in Wildcard, because they're sort of all about separating your bills and your spending money so that you can keep a track of things. So I don't want to mess too much with the existing features, but what I've done is added a new button here that's quite simple and clear for people to follow. So at this point, I'm going to copy this across here. Now, I'm imagining the flow of this is going to work in that people are just going to sort of be pushed to the right and follow it along as a series of steps. So that means a couple of things. One, I'm going to give them, they need to have the option to go back. So I'm just going to put in my little back button at the top here. I'm not being fussy about where that is at the moment, but I would, in the next round of production and polish, look at where that goes. And I think this is a little bit large. I would also, when I come to the next round of things, look at making all these type sizes consistent with the library. And I might say select maybe I'm going to do split $56 with, I'm going to just center this. I might just put this back up on the top line here. And I'm just going to like make this a little bit bolder so it's pretty clear what the action is. So I think like at this point, there's a couple of things I want to have in here. I want to put a search field in. So as you can see, I just dragged that from my components. Now I'm kind of assuming at this point that people are just going to quickly search for something. And again, I'm kind of almost going back to what I'm familiar with in something like Uber, where the quickest thing for me to do is to type that person's name and they'll show me that name and that's all good. I think at the moment, I can't quite remember, but they definitely used to have this feature where you would have your recent people that you've kind of you've used. So I want to have that feature in here too. I want to have people that I frequently split bills with, because you kind of will have your cluster of friends that you often go out with and you often do this sort of stuff. At least that's what I kind of learnt from the research. So I'm going to have a little label at the top here that says recent, and I'm going to grab two things. One is my little add button here. And the reason is, and you could do this in the search field, and what we might find in the testing is that there's a better place for this. I'm putting it here because it sort of feels a bit more easier. But I'm going to say in this line, what we've got is the ability to quickly add someone in case they actually aren't part of Wildcard, or they aren't part of, you don't have their BSB and account details and that sort of stuff. And then I'm going to have these little avatars to represent people. So I'm going to put a little label under each of these. I'm going to set this to it seems a bit small. I didn't really do everything really large. That was not large. So I'm going to just label this add. I think it's really important to often add label actions rather than just have like a button. And that's generally also from an accessibility point of view. So my first friend is going to be Flynn. And then I'm going to do James, who we just spoke to. Oops. And let's do Liv, just because we need a girl in there. Cool. So we've got basically these people here. So you might very quickly be able to tap on their profiles and just add them into who you want to split it with. What I'm also thinking about at this point is like, how do I prototype this so that people get a bit of a feel for what this experience is going to be like? And I think sometimes you have to kind of anticipate a little bit how the program works. So in this case, I need to have a little screen here that's going to, I guess, replicate that feeling of I'm going to quickly select someone and it's going to show me that I've selected them. But just quickly for now, I want to put a primary button in here that says next, because at this point, that is the primary action you want someone to take at this point, is to kind of go through and select someone else. I'm going to quickly duplicate this. And then I'm going to just put like a little line to separate these people here. And I'm going to put this avatar down the bottom here, and this area is going to represent the people that I've selected, so that whether I've typed their name in or whether I've tapped on their avatar, then I'm going to make sure that it's really clear that they are selected. So one thing is I'm going to put them into this kind of like, maybe even, I might just even label this area as like selected. It's not a particularly nice word. I think I'd probably go back and look at some like tone of voice stuff to actually get that feeling a bit nicer. And then I'm going to put this little tick button on top, or tick, I guess, label on top of this to make me know that I've definitely selected that person and that person is going to be requested for money. So I'll just change this person to someone called Jess. And then you can be Elaine, which is my cat's name. Don't ask. It's a long story. Yes, it's Seinfeld related. And then I'm just going to copy this across and do that. What I might do, just because we're sort of getting towards the end of this, is I'm going to go to my already pre-prepared screens at the top here, which, as you can see, I've filled out these wireframes. And if you've downloaded the assets already, you'll be able to see that this is where those live. So as you can see, I've kind of put in the people I'm requesting to split this with. Actually, that's interesting. I've actually been very specific here with this word request, so that it's really clear that people know what this action is doing. I've got this confirmation screen here, which is sort of saying once I've confirmed who I'm splitting with, I get a bit of an overview and it says I'm splitting it with these 4 people. And I've told people, the user, that they can tap to edit individual amounts. So they can tap on these and they can get that through. Now, at this point I might be wondering, well, is that enough? Is that clear enough to say that they know what to tap on? But at this point, I don't know. That's an assumption I'm making. And a lot of what we do in product design is test those assumptions so that we're not feeling too biased. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now, but I'm curious to see if people know when I say tap what they mean and where. So they may edit those things, and then they also might add a note. And kind of like what I was saying before, when you're prototyping, you're trying to replicate that experience, and you sort of do a few little hacks. So I've got this extra screen here around adding a note, and I've put the note in there so that you'll see when I prototype this, I'll prototype this field to kind of go straight to this screen, and it'll be instant, so it'll look exactly like they've just filled it in. So I've requested to split this here. Then I've got this last button here around send request, and then you press send request and you get this little back to the transaction screen that we started with initially. And it now has this sort of pending split kind of information on here. So I'm really aware that that's what's going to happen and that is actually pending. And I think, I anticipate like when people confirm those split requests, you might get a little tick on these too to confirm that those people have done that. So that's what I've done for the wireframes. And as you can see, they're not particularly high fidelity. They're pretty basic and pretty easy to use. And it's not, I think, again, it's very much an overview. I think you could still keep building this flow out. As you can see with this flow, like there's a lot to it, but you can still keep going. You could have a second flow. You could have other elements that you want to make sure you incorporate, like what does the confirmation of a split request look like? So you can sort of see there's a lot to it, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're doing here. And we're really using XD to wireframe. And then the last thing I'm doing here is I'm going to prototype this and link it all up. In the assets one, I've already linked this all up. So I think this one is also linked. But essentially what I can sort of show you, if I can undo this link, if I unlink this component, that's pretty easy. So, oops, I did that one, I think. Let me just, be good if all right. So essentially I can just show you, I've linked this component to this screen here, and I've linked this button so that goes to the next one. I'll show you, I guess, oops, I've already done that one. So maybe I'll do this as an example. It's really good. I can link the whole screen, or I can link particular elements, which is really useful. So in this instance, I've just selected this avatar, and I'm going to grab from this arrow and I'm going to draw kind of with this. It's really easy, and just put it on this screen because that's where it goes. I'm going to say that it should transition. That's the transition that I've got. I've got all these options, and that's a whole other kind of thing to delve into. But essentially I can choose how it animates to the next screen, and I can choose again also what that I guess, looks like. And in this instance, I want it to push left because that's the kind of, I guess, transition, which is quite familiar in iOS. So yeah, super easy. Again, I've done this with all the buttons. I've just linked these back so people can play with it a little bit. And I can just demo it here for you. Oops, if I just go back to the home screen. Right, so I've got my notification. I tap on that. I see my expense. I say split with friends. And I select Flynn, and also Liv just popped up as well, but I've kind of added that here. I do confirm. I can see that they're all there. I tap on add a note and it pops up with lunch at cafe, and I send the request, and then I'm back to my original screen with that. So it's really simple and easy, but essentially what we would do from here is to go and test that again. So like I said, all about testing, continually learning and iterating on ideas. We're nothing set in stone at this point. We're really open to hearing what people think about it and how they interact with it. And then next week, what we'll do is we'll take again what we've learnt from this week of testing, and we will go through and, I guess, start to polish it and start to make it look a little bit prettier. So hopefully that was really straightforward. Like I said, download the assets. Feel free to share what you're working on and what you learn from testing if you're also doing those at home. In week 4, we're going to go through and talk a bit more about what you've been doing, and if you share those things, we can run through it. But yeah, that's it from me. Thanks so much, and come back next week for week 3. We're looking at production and polish on UI design. Thanks so much. See you then.